Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for checking out American Made. Today, I'm excited to welcome back to the channel a special guest and friend, Gary Clemente. Gary is the son of Peter Clemente, who was a 26-year veteran of the FBI appointed by J. Edgar Hoover to the top Hoodlum Squad to investigate some of the biggest mafia bosses in the country. Gary has continued to share his father's story and legacy in his new book, Untold Mafia Tales from the FBI Top Hoodlum Squad, and I'm glad to have him on the channel to discuss it. My guest, Gary Clemente. How are you doing today, man? Thanks for being here.
I'm doing great, Jesse. I'm doing great. Can't wait to get back on with you. Excited about it. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm glad to have you back on the channel. Well, Gary, I really enjoyed reading the book, but before we jump into it, could you just give a little background on your father and kind of how he ended up as a special agent with the FBI?
Well, gosh, my father was born in 1922 in Brooklyn, New York. He was part of the greatest generation of America. Those guys that went through the Depression and World War II. And when my father got out of World War II, he wanted to become an attorney. But a little bit before that, when he was a kid, he was about 14 years of age, he went to the movie theater and he watched a movie called G-Man with Jimmy Cagney. It was a famous movie back then. He was about 14 years old at the time. And I believe that was 1939 when that movie came out. And my father was so impressed with that movie, so inspired by that. He said, that's my calling. He told me that when later on, he said, that's my calling. That's what I want to be. I want to be a crime fighter. So that's what inspired him to become an FBI agent later. But he became an attorney first. And then one day he had a discussion with his cousin and told him that, I'm an attorney right now, but I've always wanted to be a part of the FBI. I wanted to be an FBI agent. And his cousin told him, forget about it, Pete. They don't take Italians. My father was really, really upset about that. He didn't want to quit. So the first thing he did was go down to the FBI office and he applied to become an agent. And he was going to ask them, I want to find out why J. Edgar Hoover doesn't like Italians and doesn't want to have them in the FBI. Well, he's sitting across the desk with his interview with an agent, and he noticed the nameplate. It said John Capoletti on it. Well, that kind of changed things. He obviously could see that the FBI was not, impartial to Italians. My father became a part of the FBI in 1950, and then later on, that was in the early 50s. In 1957, what happened was they had a big, big mafia conclave, big meeting in Apalachin, New York, and that's when this started. When everybody was becoming investigated by the bureau because it was obviously these men were of Italian descent. They were having mob meetings, and everybody knew that they were organized crime figures, but they didn't know the exact intricate operations of the mafia at that time. So at that point, after the Appalachian meeting happened, Hoover decided to put together what he called the Top Hoodlum program. And that Top Hoodlum program, Jesse, was a part of every major city in the United States: New York, Chicago, Detroit, Buffalo, Philadelphia. All of these cities had Top Hoodlum squads imprinted in each one of these cities. My father heard about the construction of this Top Hoodlum program and said, "Look, I'm in New York. I'm of Sicilian descent. I can speak the language. I know how to talk to these hoodlums because they're of Sicilian descent, many of them. I want to be part of the Top Hoodlum Squad in New York." Well, that came to be.
We were assigned to identify the full nature of the organization that was obviously meeting on the estate of Joseph Barbera in Apalachin, New York.
My father was there for a number of years until 1963, and he transferred to the Miami office of the FBI and continued his organized crime investigations when he was in the Miami office. So he was in two very hot spots of mafia criminal activity, New York and Miami.
As I mentioned, you've been on the channel before, and we've discussed your father's entire career. But can you explain what exactly this book is about?
Well, I decided after looking at the treasure trove of material that my father left behind uh, about his career and his life in the bureau, and it's just monstrous. I'm talking about just stacks of papers that he left behind, many things that he wrote, things that he collected, other articles from magazines and what have you, FBI intelligence digests that he accumulated over the years with information in those things. I decided to take those papers and all the stories that he told me anecdotally, face to face, and write a series of books about his life in the bureau. Now, the first one is called Book One, and it revolves around his encounter with Carlo Gambino and his meeting with him, his first face-to-face meeting with Carlo Gambino, and number two, the first uh, FBI wiretapping of Carlo Gambino that my father was involved with. So that was book one, and I'm in the process of writing other books. And I say book one and other books because I purposely want to keep these things short. It's not a very long book, but I want to keep people's interest. You give somebody a 300-page book, usually
Right.
they say, "Boy, well, I'm really impressed with that. I want to read this," and they usually put it on the bookshelf, and they don't get around to reading it. So I purposely made book one short, and the others will be short as well too, revolving around his um, his career in the New York Top Hoodlum Squad and the Miami FBI office as well too.
Right. Now, many people watching this probably never heard of these stories before involving your father and Carlo Gambino. You just touched on this just a minute ago, but I just want to reiterate the sources of this information. And I've seen much of the documents that you're talking about that your father left behind. I know previously the videos that we've done, people have questioned, because they think because they've never heard of it before that it never happened. But you have, like you said, a treasure trove of documents and FBI files that your father left you that's where these stories come from.
Exactly. You have to understand that my father, as well as the other agents within the Top Woodland program, they were in the ground floor of officially investigating the mafia through the government. Before that, law enforcement, including the FBI, knew that there were organized crime figures. They knew that they operated throughout an underworld system. They just didn't know exactly what the hierarchy was. They didn't know that there was a boss of the family, that there was an underboss, there was a consigliere, an advisor. They didn't know that there were lieutenants and soldiers and buttonmen. They didn't understand all of that until they officially started to investigate the mafia after the Appalachian conclave happened, and you had over 60 of the top hoodlum members meeting in Appalachian, New York, and they get caught. They got caught by the New York State troopers. It was just obvious that there was an organized criminal organized criminal uh, entity that needed to be investigated, and Hoover had no choice. He had no choice but to come out in the open and say, okay, we need to investigate, prosecute, and arrest these people.
Right. Now, Carlo Gambino becomes boss of the family following the death of Albert Anastasia. As you just mentioned, following Apalachin, the FBI focused its attention on the Italian mafia, but little was known about these men. Your father was given the assignment of collecting intel and writing summaries of several mob bosses, including Gambino. What was all included in these reports, and what kind of information was the FBI interested in?
One of the first things I did when I entered on duty with the criminal squad was to complete summary reports on the individuals assigned to me, and one of the first was Meyer Lansky. Subsequently, I was assigned to investigate Carlo Gambino.
Well, when Appalachian happened, okay, you had these mob bosses that were discovered having a clandestine meeting in the house of Joe the Barber Barbera, who was on the surface was a Canada Dry bottler distributor, but underneath all of that, he was a mob figure. So he hosted this meeting because Vito Genovese said Carlo Gambino has gotten too powerful. He's taken over what Albert Anastasia had started with Murder Incorporated. Murder Incorporated was what? It was a rogue outfit that was part of the mob that uh, was instructed to eliminate, kill, and assassinate people that they wanted out of the way, whether they were mob figures or even citizens. Now, people think, Jesse, that the mafia they just kill each other. I remember asking my father this, Jesse. I said, "Hey, Dad, they say that you should. Why don't we just let these people kill each other? Why are we bothering, with trying to track down the killers of another killer?" Well, my dad said to me, "Well, look, if we allow them to kill their own so freely, what's to keep them from killing you or me
Right.
or anybody else?" So that was an eye opener for me, and I think it's obviously true that you don't want that to happen. The meeting ended with somebody saying "Hey, look! You look through the window of the Joe Barbera's house. Look, they've got a roadblock out there. They've got a road. Oh my gosh! There's the cops out there. Well, here are these men, these crime bosses. You think that they would be very, very relaxed about it. Well, they're not going to do anything to it. What are they going to do? No, no, no. They freaked out, Jesse. Except for people like Momo, Sam Giancana, the boss of Chicago. But all the others, the Joe Profacis, the Genoveses, Gambino included, they ran out of the house. They were scared. They were going to get fingered. This is the worst thing could happen. Anything could happen to the mafia, to be discovered as being the mafia. So what happened, Jesse, was they ran across the field and they were taking their wallets and they were throwing their wallets out of their pockets right and left. Well, the cops eventually recovered all of this, and there was about $300,000 worth of cash in all these wallets. But all of their identification was recovered. It got sent to the FBI later on, and all of that information came to the Bureau, and my father was instructed to write up government summary reports about Gambino and also Meyer Lansky. Lansky was there at that meeting as well too. Now he wasn't an official he wasn't an official mafia member, but he was an associate that made a lot of money for them. So his identification information was gathered up. And you asked me about what he did in the summaries. Well, it was really all about profiling everything that Gambino did, everything that Meyer Lansky did, all of their business associations, all of that. Um, uh, Everything from who they were married to, their children, where they lived, their addresses, phone numbers, everything you can think of was were put in those official government summary reports, which was the first time that these people were officially recognized in terms of the government.
Yeah, that's a historic assignment to be given because, like I said, up until that point, everybody knows about Carlo Gambino these days, and we discuss them and that sort of thing. But in this time period that we're talking about, very little was known about him and a lot of these other bosses. As you just mentioned, a lot of people didn't even know they existed. So for your father to be given that task to write these summaries, I think that was a very important task to be given at that time.
It certainly was. It was really the shot across the bow of the mafia. Now the government is entrenched in this. They must investigate. They must arrest and prosecute these people. Hoover must put his best foot forward to eliminate the mafia. And I remember specifically when I was younger, when I was a young boy, hearing about these figures from my father and reading some of the information that he gave me, and reading some of the books that had come out at that time about the mafia.
Hmm.
These were very fearsome people. They meant business. This is not a bunch of guys sitting around a social club eating spaghetti and meatballs and telling jokes. These are very, very dangerous people that you don't want to encounter. And there were many business people that did come across them and did do their bidding to the point where they got in trouble doing that, and sometimes lost their lives, their fortunes, and their families, because of it. These are very, very, very dangerous people.
Right. Yeah. These are very powerful men. Now, Gambino took control of the family. You write in the book. You talk about him growing the family to over 200 made men in the family. You write in the book that there was an unauthorized sale of memberships into the family for around $25,000. That's something that I've never heard before. Is that something that your father discovered during his investigation?
Yes, yes, exactly. I remember him talking to me about that, and he's written that down in some of his journals. Gambino, and that was another thing that they wanted to discuss at the Apalachin meeting. Genovese in particular. Um, and by the way, Gambino and many of the other mob bosses were pretty upset that Genovese wanted to have this meeting because obviously it ended in disaster because they were discovered by the police, and
Hmm.
they were furious about that. So yeah, that was an amazing part of it. But Gambino was starting to sell membership. Before that, see, from 1950 to about 1976, for about 25 years, Jesse, they closed the books. They closed the books on new members. And Gambino. So Gambino started to sell memberships. Before that, you had to kill somebody that you were instructed to kill in order to, what they say, make your bones, so that can become a made member of the mob. You had to kill
Right.
somebody. It wasn't you had to give money and kill somebody. So Gambino is coming around and saying, well, give me give me 25 grand. I'll let you be a part of the family. Well, the other families didn't like that.
Right.
That they felt that was wrong. That was not a part of their code, so to speak. So that was a big reason why they had the Appalachian meeting.
Okay. Yeah, I've never heard that part before, so that's interesting. Um, Now, during this work of collecting information, early one morning, while surveilling Gambino's house, your father decided to approach Carlo Gambino. Now, this had never been done before. This is the first time that an agent had a conversation with Carlo Gambino. You go into great detail about this encounter in the book. Can you talk a little bit about that morning and when your father decided to approach, at the time, the boss of bosses, Carlo Gambino?
Well, after my father wrote, or during the time that my father wrote the government summary about Gambino and who he was, when he finished, he said, uh, I think I'd like to meet this individual. He had an idea to meet him. Nobody put that idea into his head. It wasn't done by a supervisor. He said, I want to go by and talk to him, and he had a couple of reasons for it. Um, so what he did was he went to Gambino's home in Brooklyn, New York, which happened to be in the fall when it was 1957 that he decided to go see Gambino and talk to him. Now he went by himself. My father's modus operandi was to talk to these mobsters by himself because, look, if it's you and me, Jesse, if you had two FBI agents come to visit you, would you be more comfortable if one FBI agent came to visit you or two? Well, you'd be more comfortable if it was one person.
Right.
You're more likely to extract information from somebody like a mob figure if you go by yourself. You got two agents, they're going to be more, they're going to be more nervous, more paranoid. So that was the one way my father operated. So he goes to the house of Gambino. He watches from a distance him give his wife Kate Gambino, a kiss goodbye. Now Kate Gambino happens to be Carlo's first cousin. She was the sister of Paul Castellano. Kate Castellano was. Paul Castellano was eventually became the head of the Gambino family after Gambino died. So Kate Gambino was Carlo's first cousin. They've been married many years. They loved each other dearly. My father watches from down the street Gambino give Kate a kiss goodbye. Comes down the street by himself. He's got no bodyguards. No bodyguards. Why? He's the most powerful mob figure, not just in the United States at that time, but the entire world. He had probably more money than any other crime figure in the world at that time. He was a multi-millionaire. That was a lot of money back then.
Hmm.
So he comes up the street. My father approaches him and speaks to him in Sicilian, the language that my father knew since he was a little boy. Okay? Speaks to Gambino in Sicilian and says, Mr. Gambino, may I talk with you? And he showed him his badge and his credentials. Well, Gambino had the eyes of a hawk. My father always said he had a fairly large nose, eyes of a hawk. And my dad always said he reminded him of like a raptor, a bird of prey. That his, the beady eyes that he had. He
Hmm.
looks down from the credentials up to his eyes, and you could tell that Gambino meant business when he says, who are you? My father said, well, I'm Peter Clemente. I'm with the FBI. I'd like to speak with you about a few things. And Gambino immediately, and they're speaking in Sicilian, back and forth to each other. And Gambino says, why are you, why do you want to talk to me? I mean, I'm an honest businessman. I know why you're approaching me, but why? I'm an honest businessman. My father said, well, I want to talk to you about your associations with your business partner in one of your businesses. I believe it was called S&G Associates. So I'd like to talk to you about this particular individual. And Gambino said, I've got nothing to tell you. I've got nothing to tell you, and I'm an honest businessman. You go away. He said, you should be ashamed of yourself. You're nothing but, you say you're the FBI, but you're nothing but a Spiro. Spiro. It was in Sicilian. Spiro means police spy, which is an insult. So
Hmm.
you should be ashamed of yourself. My father told me this story many times. Now you can deny or not believe this, whatever you want, okay? But I can tell you that my father told the story, and he's written it down too. He said, I told Gambino, said, I should be ashamed of myself. Well, let me tell you something, sir. We in the Italian American community know what you've been involved with. We know the criminal activities you've been involved with. And you should be ashamed of yourself. I should be ashamed of myself. You should be ashamed of yours for the murder, corruption, and blood money that you've accrued over the years. Well, Gambino didn't want to hear that. He said something nasty in Sicilian, and it wasn't something about I want to have you over for supper sometime. It was a profanity in Sicilian, and vaffanculo. He spun around and walked by him, walked into the car. He had a driver that came to wait for him, and they drove off. Well, my dad had two things accomplished in that meeting. And I had asked him, I said, Dad, why in heck did you want to approach Gambino like this in the first place? What was the reason for it? There's no way you're going to arrest him unless you thought that you would insult him and he'd take a swing at you and
Hmm.
you could arrest him because he's trying to assault a federal officer. But even that would be too fantastical. There's no way you could have thought that. And he said, well, I'll tell you, son. I had two reasons for it. Number one, I wanted to see what sort of personality he had. Was he rattled easily? Was he quiet? Was he angry all the time? Was he defensive? I wanted to write about that in my profile, what sort of personality he had. And number two, I wanted to hear his voice. And I didn't want to just talk to him in Sicilian to exchange recipes in Sicilian. I wanted to hear his voice because if one day we ever wiretapped him, I could listen to his voice and I could identify him as being the man behind that voice, possibly conspiring to commit certain crimes in that wiretap. So that was the big reason why. Interesting story, and I have to hand it to my dad. I'm very proud of him of that. He thought that way. My dad was just as shrewd as Gambino was. And the Sicilians like to do this. When you're a shrewd individual, you do this. This is the signal.
Yeah, I mean that says a lot about your father that he wasn't intimidated to approach Gambino like that, and I'm sure he was not used to being approached in that way and being spoken to that way. So that says a lot about your father. Now, I wanted to ask you, when we originally spoke, we touched on this story, this confrontation between your father and Carlo Gambino, and there were quite a few comments on that video. Some of them were critical of your father, and in some cases defended Carlo Gambino. I was just curious if you saw those, or you had a rebuttal to that.
Well, I did see some of the comments, and look, you're not going to get everybody to like you. Nobody likes everybody all the time, every time. And I realize that, but I wanted to make some comments about, people that have, written, written comments, to the podcast, about Gambino, about how Gambino was sort of a hero figure, that Italians did admire him, and that my father was, really shouldn't have criticized Gambino that day on the street about, Italian Americans being ashamed of mafia activity and mafia people. Well, let me just say this, as I alluded to before. You have to understand that these these are vicious criminals. Okay, yes, they happen to be Italian. Yes, they put together this amazing organization that was really feared and respected throughout the entire world. Yes, that's quite an accomplishment. It really is. And these people were these were brilliant people, many of them. And my father told me many times that look, son, these people could have been titans of industry. They could have been, financial wizards if they had wanted to be. But yet they chose the path of organized crime.
Hmm.
And since they chose that path, myself and others within the Bureau, we had no choice but to arrest these people. They're committing illegal activity, even murder. So, to those out there that want to admire and revere the mafia, so be it. That's your choice. But I have to tell you that I'm not here, and my father was never around to glorify the mafia. I don't think that the mafia should be glorified. It was a criminal organization that committed so many, atrocities. They stole tens and tens and tens and tens of billions and billions of dollars at that time. They ruined the lives and fortunes of a lot of people and businesses. They were uh, they were they were in league with the devil. And don't be fooled by, the glorification and romanticizing of the mafia, which happened in the movie The Godfather. That's why we revere it so much many times. The Godfather romanticized the mafia, made these mafia individuals more human and even likable, to the point where we
Hmm.
said, "Well, I'd like to be somebody like Michael Corleone. I like to be Vito Corleone." Yeah, hey, look, I bet you would admit that too, Jesse. When you listen to Vito Corleone talk,
Right.
and he's, "Oh, yeah, well, we have ways of, persuading you to, come to our side," and he's calm and collected, and he has a certain amount of wisdom to him, and you want to be like that. But in real life, these people were very dangerous people, and, you did not want to be an intimate part of their world. Listen, am I ashamed of, what my fellow Italian Americans did as far as the mafia is concerned? I would say that yes, I am ashamed, but I do respect what they accomplished in an organizational way. It was brilliant what they had done and how they kept it together.
Hmm.
That part I respect. Yeah, I respect. Am I ashamed of, what they did? Yes, even they are my fellow Italian Americans, believe it or not. And I would not want to get close to them either and get involved in their activities either by selling my soul to the devil like many of them did.
Right. Now, moving forward a little bit, your father getting to hear Carlo Gambino's voice during that meeting on the street there would come in handy a few years later. I think the book says 1962, down in Miami, your father and another agent were carrying out the first ever electronic surveillance of Carlo Gambino and a couple other men. What led your father down to Miami? And what led Carlo Gambino to Miami? And how did that all go down?
Well, the year was 1962. Okay, the FBI knew that Carlo Gambino was going to be heading down to Miami Beach for a combination of business and pleasure. He was going to take his wife there, and he was going to be there for quite a while, possibly. So they knew the hotel that he was going to stay at. It was called the Golden Gate Motel. It was a middle of the road establishment that wasn't very ostentatious, wasn't flashy, it wasn't the Fontainebleau, it wasn't the Diplomat, the Eden Rock, those big splashy, big hotels. He wanted to keep a low profile. That's why he wanted to stay at the Golden Gate Hotel. The FBI knew that he was going to stay there ahead of time, got word of it through their intelligence sources, and they wiretapped the room, wiretapped it. Well, they sent my father down from New York down to Miami Beach. I remember it happening when I was young. I was about 11 years old at the time. But they put my father and another agent in the next suite next to Gambino, unbeknownst to Gambino, and it was quite a story. He was sent there to man the wiretap of Gambino and his associates when they came to visit him. They had a couple of small microphones that were embedded, Jesse, in the A block of Gambino's suite. What's the A block? Well, the A block was a telephone wiring connection. It's about this big, about 2 inches by 2 inches, and it's stuck on the floorboard. And you would see the phone cords, go into these A blocks. Well, they had two small sensitive microphones in the A block, and that's how they would pick up the sound, which went next door to my father's suite, and they recorded it into a reel-to-reel tape recorder at that time. So that's how they all set it up. And what happened was the FBI was following Gambino and his associates outside before Gambino came to his room. And one day something happened that the FBI got too close to following Gambino and his associates, Tommy Palmer and also Tommy Greco. Tommy Palmer was Jimmy Parmesan. They call him Tommy Palmer. Then his other lieutenant was Tommy Greco, and they were hanging out with Gambino, and they saw these FBI agents, two of them, down the block taking pictures of them. Well, they got pretty upset about that. And they came back to the hotel room with Gambino, and they were cussing up a storm about it. Gambino was listening to them. It was Greco and Tommy Palmer that were cursing up a storm about it. And they got pretty upset before they came into the room, Jesse.
Now, your father speaking Sicilian, uh, was that one of the reasons that he was transcribing those conversations, those wiretaps?
Yes, exactly. His partner did not speak any Sicilian at all. He was non-speaking completely. And my father wound up really spending most of the time on the reel-to-reel listening to the conversations that Gambino was having with his underlings.
Now, you mentioned that there were some agents that were following Gambino and these two men back to the hotel. This sort of got the guys a little paranoid, and they was a little bit concerned about possibly being wiretapped. Can you talk about that and how that played out?
Yes, it was pretty. It was like a movie. It really was like a movie. I want you to imagine this, okay? In one suite, and on the other side of one wall is Gambino, and his wife Kate was there too. She came down with him too, and was Gambino. And on the other side of the wall, you had two FBI agents listening in on Gambino. And that Gambino was there for 6 weeks, Jesse. So my father and his partner Paul listened in on the conversation for 6 weeks, and they had to make sure that Gambino and his people never discovered them by coming out the door next door to them and discovering them. So they had to be very careful, or even catching them down in the lobby. So you have to understand what they had to go through. They had to go through hoops not to be discovered. So one day they came back, the three of them, and they were mad as heck about the FBI agents following them and taking pictures and being so obvious about it. And my father was upset about it. He told Paul, he said, why are these guys on the outside following them so closely? Don't they know? They know that we're operating in here. They know that we're here listening in on their conversation. They're gonna blow our cover somehow. So what happened was uh, Tommy Palmer and Greco started yelling up a storm to Gambino as they came back into the suite and telling us, these SOBs that are following us, they're following us. Did you see them, Carlo? Did you see them? They're everywhere. Look, they could be down the street. They could be in the next room for all we know. And my father's listening to this on the headphones. He's, oh, and Paul is going, Pete, what is this? My dad said, he just said they're talking to each other, and they're saying they could be down the street or in the next room for all we know. And Paul is like, oh, he's getting really paranoid about this. He had personal reasons for getting paranoid because he was afraid of getting transferred to another office if this operation was blown. He was
Mm-hmm.
afraid of that. And my father had to keep calming him down because Paul wanted to pull the plug on this. He told my dad, says, "Hey Pete, they think we're in the next one. We need to pull the plug on this." My dad said, "Calm down, calm down, calm down." So he's listening, and Gambino is trying to tell his underlings, "Look, these people, I don't like it. You don't like. I don't like it. These people are doing their jobs. You got to understand that this is what you run into. Okay, this is part of the process. Okay." So the other two, Tommy Greco and Palmer, they start. They said, "Well, we're gonna look. We got to look around this place to see if there's any bugs or something, you know." And Gambino was telling him, "Yeah, what do you mean bugs?" And this Greco said, "Yeah, I read this thing in Newsweek magazine about how the CIA they can put a bug in an olive in a martini glass." And
Hmm.
Gambino starts laughing. Said, a bug in an olive in a martini glass. Again, they can sit right next to you, have a drink, and they can listen to your conversation. And Gambino says, well, if they're listening to your conversation through an olive in a martini glass, and they're sitting right by you, and they can't just listen to with their own ears. Is that where money's going, for crying out loud, or taxpayer money? So, so he's trying to make a light of the situation. Gam, Greco starts to look around he starts to look around everywhere. He's looking under the bed. He's looking into the light fixtures. He's looking everywhere. He looks under the bed and he starts to yell. He says, "Ah! It's just it's filthy down here with this rat infested place." And he pulls out a used condom. Ugh. Ah, this is disgusting, And uh, Gambino thought that was rather funny, and Gambino calmed him down. Says, "Look, take it easy. I'm getting a little agita. He had a heart condition, so I want you to get me a bicarb, okay, from from the kitchen, okay." He gets a bicarb and he drinks it down, calms him down, and this is part of the comedy of errors that was going through with my father and Gambino on the other side of the wall there. It was like really something like out of a movie.
Yeah, it's a great story. You go into a lot of detail, and it's a comical. It's interesting, but it's very comical, and you can almost, the way you tell the story in the book, you can just picture Gambino sitting back, watching the news, and these two guys tearing the room up, and he's trying to calm them down, and it's really comical. It's a good story.
It
Um,
is.
Now I wanted to talk about the two men that were in the room with Carlo Gambino. Your father tells a story in the book about the only member of La Cosa Nostra to ever threaten him to his face. Um, and it happened to be one of those men. Can you talk about that pretty tense encounter between your father and that man?
It was Tommy Palmer, who was real name Jimmy Palmisano, and they call him Tommy Palmer. So it was Tommy
Okay.
Palmer, and Tommy Palmer was living in Miami Beach at the time. He had a condo there, and one day my father decided to go pay him a visit, as he had done previous times, to visit Palmer, and just to check up on him, to keep tabs on these people, their whereabouts. I said their whereabouts because many, if they're killed for whatever reason, you got to find out, are they still around? Well, if you're trying to find somebody and they're not at their address for a number of weeks, is it because they were killed? They vanished somehow. So you want to keep tabs on these people. So that was one of my father's subjects. And Parmesan never knew that it was my father. Earlier, several years earlier, they was listening in on his conversations at the Golden Gate Hotel. So it wasn't until years later in the early 70s that my dad used to visit Parmesano at his condo to see what he was up to. And one day, Palmer just did not like my father coming by to visit him. He was just out of sorts. He had sugar diabetes. He had a bad heart condition. He just was not a well man. And my father came by to see him, uh, and Palmer spouted off. They said, "Hey, look, Pete, do you really think I'm the sort of guy that if you think I'm the sort of guy that they say I am, that would do things to people like you've purported that I would do, don't you think that I wouldn't possibly do that same thing to you right now?" Well, that was a veiled threat with his life, and he kind of pretended to take his finger and make believe it was a gun pointed at his forehead. And if you read the book, you'll hear the conversation and what my father imparted back to him, telling him that you had better be careful about what you say. You better mean what you say, because if you mean what you say, Tommy, I will put your lights out.
Right.
So my father meant business, and he also after that my dad uh, took his previous service pistol, which was like a little pop gun, and he upgraded to a semi-automatic Remington that was pretty powerful, and he kept that around him at all times because he said he was wary of what had happened. Not that he was afraid or anything, but he was just wanted to be smart, have the right protection in case anything ever happened.
Right. Yeah, that's another great story in the book. That interaction between those your father and the other man and the threat and your father's response to him. That was a really good story. Um, Now, towards the end of the book, your father discusses how the bugging operation concluded at the Golden Gate Hotel. I thought it was interesting when your father describes thinking to himself the similarities and differences between himself and Carlo Gambino, both with similar ethnic backgrounds. Both men would lead very different, but in some ways, very similar lives. That was a very interesting reflection by your father. Um, your father would continue his career with the FBI. When did he finally or eventually retire from the agency?
Well, my dad retired in 1976, and he was 53 years of age, and he decided to get out 2 years earlier. It was mandatory to retire from the Bureau at the age of 55. And my dad was 53 at the time. And he said, you know what? I'm not going to wait for them to boot me out. I'm going to retire 2 years earlier and study for the bar in Florida. Now, he studied for the bar and passed the bar, became an attorney in New York 24 years previous, 26 years previous to that. And he had to study for the bar in Florida if he wanted to become an attorney. And quite remarkably, people understand if you've gone through the bar, it's quite an arduous process to become an attorney. There are many people that don't pass the bar exam the first time around. They've got to take it a couple of times, maybe three times before they
Hmm.
pass. Well, my father studied on his own. After being away from law for many, many years, he studied on his own and passed the bar exam in Florida for the first time that took the exam, and he became a criminal attorney, defending criminals, not mafia figures, but people that were brought up on criminal charges. So that's what he had done.
Yeah, your father, he's got a fascinating career and a fascinating life. I know that just from talking to you before that the stories that we've discussed in this book are just a small part of your father's historic life and career. Um, you did say you have plans for more books to come in the future. Is that right?
Yes, certainly. There's so many different stories. Stories about his interaction with Joe Valachi, the first mobster who ever sang like a bird. His interactions with mobsters in Miami, people like Joe Bruno, who wanted to take over the entire Miami garbage industry. How he thwarted that. Stories like that I will be including in the books, as well as all of the Hoover incidents, all of the stories about the FBI and Hoover, what made Hoover, who he was, some behind the scenes stories that my father had about J. Edgar Hoover, stories about how the FBI interacted with the mafia, stories about the FBI's uh, life itself, the agents that were part of the FBI, agents that had human issues themselves that were not perfect either. And you have to understand that the FBI in those years, the golden years of the mafia from 1950 to 1980 or so, and my father's FBI years, those agents, they were the cream of the crop. They were the jet fighter pilots of law enforcement. You couldn't get any better than to be an FBI agent, a special agent with the FBI. You were revered. Unfortunately, I have to say that today's FBI has fallen far, far from grace. They have disgraced themselves. My father was really, really upset about that before his passing 8 years ago. And people like James Comey and what the FBI had fallen into, how corrupt the Bureau has become. And I can say here and now that I do believe that President Trump, and hopefully with the appointment of Kash Patel as the FBI director, I believe the Bureau can be turned around, because it's not. The FBI of today is not the FBI what it used to be, a revered organization that investigated and arrested people that were involved in all sorts of criminal activity. And you were really proud. I was proud to be a part of that as the son of a special agent of the FBI. And I talked to many of those agents back then, and they were just down to earth guys. These were World War II guys, down to earth individuals that could talk to anybody, smart, bright, college educated people that were very down to earth and very middle class. So I was very proud to come out of that and be a part of that.
Yeah, I know there are so many fascinating stories in your father's life and career, and I look forward to more books in the future. Untold Mafia Tales from the FBI's Top Hoodlum Squad. Book number 1, Carlo Gambino, Boss of Bosses. I think it's a great book. Where can people go to order a copy of this book?
Well, basically, you can go to Amazon. It's available on Amazon, front and center. That's uh, that's the best way to do it.
All right, man, that sounds good. Well, Gary, I appreciate you coming on the channel and giving me a little bit of time to talk with you about this book. It's fascinating. I look forward to more books in the future. Um, I appreciate you coming on the channel, man. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me, Jesse. I really, really get a kick out of being with you. You've got a great channel, and you've got great stories. Not just me, but you've got other people coming on with some great mob stuff. And as I keep mentioning, the stories that I try to impart are things that people have never heard before.
Hmm.
They haven't been documented in newspapers or magazines. And I am here to bring them front and center. And I'm trying to honor my father's legacy as much as I can, and not just him, but the members of the Federal Bureau of Investigation that worked alongside him, that brought down the mafia to its knees. So thanks again, Jesse.
Yes, sir. All right, guys. Thanks for checking out this video. Make sure to order a copy of Gary's book. It's a great book. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and keep following American Made. I appreciate it.